We've got a bit of breaking news from the Premier League. Everton and Nottingham Forest are facing points deduction charges by the Premier League for breaching profit and sustainability rules. We can find out exactly what this means and get the very latest with talkSPORT's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook, joins us. Crookie, good afternoon.
Yeah, good evening, guys. Nervous and worrying times for fans of both Everton and Nottingham Forest. As you say, they're the two clubs that have been found in breach of the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. We were expecting a statement confirming this from the Premier League around about now. That hasn't come out yet, but both Everton and Forest have released their own independent statements. These charges relate to seasons 2020 and 21, 21 to 22, and 22 to 23. Now, during this period, clubs in the Premier League were permitted to report losses on their annual accounts of a maximum of £105 million over that 3-year period. Clearly, both Everton and Forest have gone above that threshold. Of course, Everton already deducted 10 points for previous breach of FFP rules. They are, of course, challenging that points deduction. And my understanding is that in Everton's case, the overspend relates to interest payments on the stadium that they're currently constructing. They felt that they wouldn't be subject to the profit and sustainability rules and felt that when they sold Richarlison to Tottenham for £60 million, that would bring them under the threshold of £105 million. The basis of their appeal, I think, will be that those interest payments shouldn't be counted. If they win that appeal, then you would expect this charge to go away as well. That appeal, I'm told, should be heard by the end of February, so we might get news on that shortly. I will just read you the statements from the two clubs. Very different tone, actually. Nottingham Forest, a very brief statement we've had from them acknowledging that they have been charged with a breach of the profit and sustainability rules. They say that the club intends to continue to cooperate fully with the Premier League on the matter and are confident of a speedy and fair resolution. Everton's a little bit more confrontational, I would suggest. They've come out fighting. They too have acknowledged the charges. They say the Premier League does not have guidelines which prevent a club being sanctioned for alleged breaches in financial periods which have already been subject to punishment, unlike other governing bodies, including the EFL. As a result of that, Everton saying because of the Premier League's new commitment to deal with such matters in season, the club is in a position where it's had no option but to submit a calculation which remains subject to change pending the outcome of the appeal. So just backing up what I was saying, really, that if they win the appeal against the initial 10 points deduction, they feel this charge won't stand either. Everton can assure its fans that it will continue to defend its position during the ongoing appeal, and should it be required to do so at any future commission, and that the impact on supporters will be reflected as part of that process. So Everton, certainly a lot more forthright than Nottingham Forest. But as you said, Andy, if they are found guilty by the independent commission of breaching these rules, then both clubs could be subject to points deductions, and that will have a massive say on the Premier League relegation battle this season.
Obviously, on the back of that, I've got some questions. So what's the next step? When are we going to find out if and when these clubs will be deducted points, and when will we find out how many points it would or could be?
Well, it's quite key what Everton have said in the statement there, because the Premier League, in bringing in these profit and sustainability rules, the idea was that matters were dealt with much more quickly. Therefore, if you are found guilty, your points penalty will come in that same season. Basically, they want to avoid a Manchester City situation where we're still waiting the outcome over their 115 charges. So, as I say, the appeal on their initial 10-point penalty, Everton, is expected to be heard between the middle and the end of February. Obviously, because the two are so closely linked together, the independent commission can't really make a ruling on this case until that appeal is heard. So once that appeal has come through, if Everton were to lose the appeal, I'd imagine, 4 to 6 weeks after that, we'll then find out if they're going to be hit with a fresh points deduction on the back of this second charge.
Crookie, do you think people now are starting to take FFP a little bit more seriously? Because it feels like in this January window it's been really quiet, whereas previous January windows people are throwing money at left, right and centre. But do you think because of what's happened to Everton with the points deduction, people are starting to think, you know what, let's just leave it for now and then maybe go again in the summer?
Yeah, I think that's a massive factor. I've mentioned on talkSPORT a couple of times during this window that I've been told by sources that 80% of the Premier League are on the line of breaching profit and sustainability, which is why we're not seeing mega money transfers. I think in the last January window, we had a record spend in the Premier League of more than £800 million. There's only actually been one paid-for signing so far this window. That's Radu Dragusin coming to Tottenham from Genoa for around about £26 million. Everything else is loan deals like Timo Werner, where he's come until the end of the season, and the possibility to sign him in the summer, because, of course, then that will be a different set of accounts that the figures are put in. We saw it with Arsenal, actually, in the summer. They signed David Raya. It's effectively a permanent transfer. It was dressed up as a loan deal with the option at the end of the season because Arsenal wanted that money to be accounted for in a different financial year. What I would say is we're talking an awful lot about this sort of stuff, more than we're talking about football. And the other element, and it's a fascinating one when it comes to Chelsea, for example, Conor Gallagher. If somebody bids £45 million to £50 million, Chelsea will sell Conor Gallagher this window, not because Mauricio Pochettino doesn't think he's good enough. He's the captain, but it's because he's a homegrown player, and therefore that £45-50 million goes down on the balance sheet as 100% profit. We might see Emile Smith-Rowe leave Arsenal for the same reason this transfer window, and Everton probably will have to sell Jared Branthwaite in the summer window to help balance next season's books. Is that really good for football fans? Seeing homegrown players who come through the academy sold just to balance the books? I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure that is what football is all about. I think the profit and sustainability laws were well intended, but I think they're flawed fundamentally, because also the £105 million threshold has been in place for a decade now. Think about how the world has changed in the last 10 years. Think about inflation for a start. Think about the wages in the Premier League, the transfer fees, the fact that owners now, because many of them hail from overseas, are a lot richer maybe than they were 10 years ago. I think £105 million is not enough.
I agree with everything you've said, but that still doesn't cover up the fact that some clubs have done exactly what they should over the last 3 years when they submitted their financial figures at the end of December, I think it was, and other clubs haven't been able to do that. And if you're going to pat the ones on the back that have done it, you have to punish the ones that haven't managed to do it. Just going back to what you were saying about Everton, one of their defences is they don't think the interest costs should be counted for the stadium rebuild. Surely that's written down in black and white somewhere, whether or not that does or doesn't count.
Yeah, I think the suggestion possibly is that initially the Premier League gave them the impression that maybe those interest payments wouldn't count towards the profit and sustainability rules, and now they do. So it will be interesting to see if that argument holds up in appeal. If it does, it potentially opens a can of worms, doesn't it?
Last question. I could go on for days about this. Last question. I mentioned that the deadline was the 31st of December for all the clubs to submit their financial figures. You've mentioned Forest and you've mentioned Everton. Any other clubs that we should be talking about soon, or is that it? Are they the only two?
As far as I know, they're the only two. I've reached out to a couple of other clubs who were maybe mentioned as being borderline, and they're pretty confident that they're not going to be charged. We should find out very shortly from the Premier League. As I say, we're expecting to get a statement from them at 4:00. And obviously, we've gone a little bit beyond that now. So I'll let you know as soon as that statement lands. But I'm not anticipating any other clubs are being involved. Just on the Forest situation as well, there's an interesting story behind why they feel they've been charged. Brennan Johnson was, of course, sold by Nottingham Forest to Tottenham in the summer. They got £45 million. He could have gone to Brentford for £30 million in June. Because that move didn't happen, the £45 million happened in August. That can't be accounted until the next set of accounts. Had they have sold him a few weeks earlier, their accounts would have been £30 million better off. But effectively, they'd have been £15 million poorer, because Spurs paid 45 million as opposed to the 30. So that's an interesting little line as well. Is it better for the long-term sustainability of football clubs that they take a lesser offer earlier in the window, or they hold out for a better fee, and therefore surely they're on a better financial footing?
Yeah, but rules are rules, right? I mean, they've spent that £15 million somewhere else. So I agree with you. I think, the clubs are being hard done by, but rules are rules at the moment until they change. So anyway, listen, I'm sure we'll come back to you as and when the Premier League release their statement. But for the time being, Cookie, as always, a real pleasure, and we'll speak to you in a bit.
No problem.
Thanks. There you go. talkSPORT's chief football correspondent Alex Crook with all the very latest.
talkSPORT Drive. Super opinionated sporting debate. Monday to Friday afternoon from 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.